action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today, I've caught Dave Wakeman, a writer, teacher, and consultant dubbed the Revenue Architect. Dave's clients call him a shot of adrenaline, helping to tackle their marketing and profitability challenges head on. His work has taken him across the globe, working with huge brands like American Express, Google, and Coca-Cola. He's also host of The Business of Fun, a quality pod on marketing live experiences for folks selling sport, theatre and entertainment. Dave says, to be successful at strategy, you have to be able to see the world through two different eyes at once. The first eye is the eye of the analyst, and the second eye belongs to the architect. The architect needs vision, creativity, and the willingness to be bold in pursuit of something that the world has never seen before. Welcome to the show, Dave.
That is some kind of introduction. I did not know that. I'm starting to ask myself, who exactly is this person that you're talking to today?
He sounds good, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He sounds great. Shoot, man, I can't wait to listen to this thing. This guy's going to be amazing. Thank you for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here. I do think that this is probably the greatest marketing podcast in the world, and that's only slightly hyperbolic because I have to be nice to you, so you'll put the thing out now.
Nice, thanks, man. It's payback time. It's 7 quick-fire questions.
This is the best part.
Beer or margaritas?
Beer or margaritas is absolutely beer. Come on, man. That was too easy. You got to work these things up.
They start easy.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I was thinking you were going to ask me like a challenging question because I knew there'd be a beer question. And would it be like Beavertown or Brewdog? And I was like, well, shoot, that's going to be a little tough, but it would definitely be Beavertown. Yeah, of course. But I do love Brewdog because they're always very nice to me over the years. And there's always one like in London. So you can always find like a proper like IPA. So I'm a fan of both. And I was expecting something like that, not margaritas. That's easy. That's too easy.
Okay, what about this? Number 2, hockey or baseball?
Ooh, now that's a little tougher. If you asked me as a younger Dave, I would have said baseball. But I'd say now I really like hockey. Hockey, the Washington Capitals is the local team. I go to way more Washington Capitals games than I do to either the Nationals or the Orioles, which are the two closest baseball teams. So I would say at this point, I would definitely go with hockey.
Number 3, Conte or Poch?
Oh, I knew this was coming. And no, you didn't warn me. I just knew you were going to ask this. And so I would say I'm a romantic at heart. And so I would like to lean towards Pochettino. But I'm going to go with Conte because I feel like Spurs fans, the team, they needed to move past Pochettino. And Conte is a good way of doing that. And he's been doing tremendous work. But I will never not love Pochettino.
Right, sticking with that theme, White Hart Lane or the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium?
Again, I'm a romantic. But I never had a chance to go to a game at the old White Hart Lane. So I'm not as sentimental about it as other people are. So it would be more for me, it would be Wembley or the new White Hart Lane. But I would still say the new White Hart Lane because it's amazing. It's the most incredible stadium in the world.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, okay, well answered. To me, I see them as the same thing, really. It will always be White Hart Lane to us, won't it? Number 5.
I love this. This is going to be good.
This is the lesser evil. The billable hour or start with why?
Oh, see, you're like reading my notes here too with the start with why stuff. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but come on, that thing's worthless. The billable hour though is also, geez, that's the tough one. I'm going to say start with why as a better one because I feel like the billable hour is the root of almost all evil for consultants and people who price, because it costs people more money than Start With Why could ever hope to.
Yeah, okay, great answer. We're gonna get more into the billable hour soon. And on that theme, there's number 6 is units of cost or units of value.
Well, units of value. I mean, come on. Units of cost is like putting you in the position to be a commodity. Units of value is where the conversation should be. You gotta like focus on value, not cost, because nobody cares really. Price is just a BS objection that people lay out for you just because you haven't done a good job explaining value. So it's always about value.
Yeah, that was a tap in. Right, last one.
Yeah, that was a little like, I'm sure this one's going to be awesome. This is going to be like the toughest one.
This one's good because there's a great story behind it. Right, Eddie Murphy or Eddie Vedder?
Oh, well, it's definitely Eddie Vedder. But it's God. How could I pick? Those are the two greatest Eddies ever.
Yeah.
It's Eddie Vedder, but not by much, because I mean, and I know where this story came from, because we were talking about how much we loved like Raw, and like as kids we got to watch Raw, and then there's an Eddie Vedder story that will probably come up at some point. So there,
just a little tease for now.
Yeah, I was gonna say it would definitely be Eddie Vedder, because I am a tremendous fan of not just his professional work, but the work he does. He said something really great, and we can probably get into this more later. That really stuck with me at a concert that I was at one time, and he said, like, look, when you're been given this light and you have an opportunity to shine this light on others, you have to take it. Something to that effect. And his work through all the different charities and organizations that his band and their charitable foundation and him and his wife support. He's just an inspiration, and love his music or not, you have to be really, really, admire the work he does.
Well said. Right, so Dave, thank you for joining us.
Awesome.
We like to celebrate Root's guest take in their career, specifically when they start, mostly because we think there's huge value in people understanding this idea of the right way doesn't really exist. So for our audience, could you tell us what was your first ever job? What was your first proper job? And make sure this somehow takes the route of chatting about nightclubs, because I've seen that in your Twitter bio too.
Okay. And so let me ask you this. And actually, the first job is easy. American football, right? When I was a teenager in middle school, 8th grade, probably 13 years old, I sold racks of Coca-Cola at high school football games. In the States, especially in the South where I grew up, high school football is like a religion. So I would sell these racks of sodas. I was trying to remember how big they were, and I think it was probably like they'd hold like 2 dozen, or 24 to 30 Coca-Colas at a time, and you'd walk up and down the stands. Anybody want a Coke? I think they were $1, and for each rack I sold, I got $5. That was my first job. I was 13 years old. That's easy. The second part of the question, though, is I do have a question, and I'm not doing this to be needlessly obtuse or like difficult, but how do you define proper?
I think it's got to be a job that had a significant effect on your career, that you found the right industry, or it could be something that really meant something.
Yeah. Okay. So then in that case, I've been very lucky, because in some ways, I've had a many number of jobs that have had a tremendous impact on me. We'll get to the nightclubs, because that really is where I think I learned almost every lesson that I applied to my marketing career, even though it was not a marketing job specifically. And yeah, I asked the question because I was like, I think I was probably like almost, what am I, 47 now? So I was probably 37 by the first time I had like a job that you would define specifically as a marketing or advertising job. So like when you're saying proper, I would be like, I'd be a bad example for a proper like marketing and advertising job, because it was like, I was a long way down the road before I ever got to that.
Yeah, but you say bad example. I don't think that's a bad example. I think the most interesting and kind of talented people I meet in this industry have taken a very scenic route to get into this industry, and that's what we're trying to really elicit. So yeah.
Okay, so scenic. Then we have that definitely handled here. Then, so I did that job, and then I held a series of just regular jobs. The first job that really like stood out and made me open my eyes, though, is I worked for the city where I grew up, doing recreation over the summer. And I say this, you said it have an impact. It was because I was 19 years old and I started, and somehow I ended up being a manager of people at 19 years old. And it was kids that were my own age. And then to have people come back to me and go, you had such an influence on me, and they're the same age as I am. Like, you were such a great leader and manager. And I was like, well, that's just sounds like garbage to me, because I was like, well, I didn't know how to get out of my own way at 19 years old. The first real job though, where I understood the importance and power of marketing and sales and revenue generation, was definitely a business I started when I was 17, which I wouldn't call a proper job, but I started a auto detailing business and car wash business. And I was able to, very fortunately, win a contract with the Florida Lottery. So I washed all the Florida Lottery vans and I got $20 per car washed. And so then I had employees. That was pretty good. But that was it was really pretty lucky that I fell into that, because I couldn't recreate that if if it was the last thing was going to do. It was not. And then, you do all your odd jobs. But then I fell into nightclubs, and I was taking a summer school class at the community college in Fort Lauderdale, where I went to high school and was a young adult until about 22 or 23. And I met this guy called Mike. And Mike gave me one of the greatest pieces of advice that I ever heard. And and then we'll get to the nightclub things, but hopefully this is not too risque. And if you can edit it out if you want to, but this was so great. He goes, Dave, if you've ever gotten laid, you're in sales and marketing. And I said, wow, that's and he explained it to me through going, look, if you're going to do that, if you get somebody to do that with you, then you're definitely selling yourself. And I was like, going, wow. And that really turned the lights on for me. I don't know if that's too risque for your audience, but that's where the first time. And then Mike introduced me to a friend of his who owned a valet parking service for a nightclub, and he needed people to help him. And through that, it was how I got opened up into nightclubs. And you still have some pretty good nightlife in England. There is many nightclubs that I have been to in the city of Birmingham over the years, because I somehow end up in Birmingham every time I'm in England. But nightclubs were really, really powerful because you are really connected to the customer. And why it was so impactful was for really one meeting. And I was trying to remember last night while I was making notes for the podcast today, what we called these damn meetings on Monday. But every Monday we would get together and we would try to come up with ideas. So one time there was two guys, Dave Townsend and Gary Smith. And Gary ended up becoming the chief marketing officer of the it's a fondue restaurant, the Melting Pot. And he comes to us, he goes, we need to raise our per check average 25 cents. And through that question, I was able to come up with the greatest question that I ever learned to ask. And that is, what gin do you prefer? And so it taught me, and this is the question that taught me everything I know about marketing and pricing and sales, because I found out through this question of how do you get 25 cents per customer more out of these things, that nobody wants just a well gin and tonic, right? No, everybody has a preference for their gin. And because everybody has a preference to their gin, it opens up this idea of a story, because the gin you choose is a story about who you are. And because you're using this thing, people have a better experience, right? So, they feel better about their time at the club. They feel better about their experience, probably feel a little more romantic, or a little, a little hotter, like they're going to pick up somebody, at the club, and, they're going to dance better and all these things. And then the magic thing was I learned about profitability, because when you're dealing with a nightclub, the bulk that you buy the liquor in, the incremental cost is very small. In the mid 90s, when this was happening, I'm going to say a well drink probably cost $4 at the nightclub. And the cost to make that drink was $1. That's a well drink. But if I charge somebody for a Tanqueray and tonic or a Bombay and tonic, which were probably the two most popular at the time, the incremental cost, if I'm being generous, was probably a quarter more cost to me, but I would charge $2 more. So I would almost double the profit for 25 cents more. So it was a pretty powerful lesson that profitability is tied to the price.
And also, I suppose you have the benefit of seeming more personable.
Well, absolutely. Yes. And as I moved on through like my career and, opening nightclubs and bars and like, being close to customers and understanding it really got me to like some of the really big moments in my career. But I would win every sales contest just because I took that question and I internalized it into everything I did. It was like never like, oh, you just want to drink. Oh, well, what's going on? You like 30 seconds of conversation might double a check, right? And if you doubled your check, you get tips, you make more money. And it was that was super powerful. So nightclubs opened the door to everything. And I learned advertising through partnerships with radio, promotions through the promotions we do at the beach to get college kids there during spring break, product because we would package different nights in different ways, operations, marketing, sales, strategy. I mean, I learned everything in the span of these 3 years that I was opening nightclubs in Fort Lauderdale and in a couple other cities around the country. It was like a really, really incredible experience.
Yeah, that sounds ace. I like that. I like that for two reasons. One, about being so connected to the customer because you're literally in the customer's face all night. So I mean, that's so far removed from say the B2B type of business that the clients that we perhaps work with predominantly. But I also love the fact that what gin do you prefer? I mean, I suppose nowadays you'd probably suggest it was a psychology or behavioural science at play because it's certainly a nudge of sorts. It reminds me of Rory Sutherland, that question he hates at restaurants, red or white, because as soon as you answer, bam, you're drinking wine, you're not drinking gin.
No, I mean he's definitely right, and I would say that it probably is really tied to psychology, but the more important thing to me was uh, it was that relationship with the customer, and it was that relationship in a way that it gave you the chance to give people a much better experience, and to me I always fall back on it when people ask me, how do you define or describe or teach somebody about market orientation? I go, that's market orientation right there. It's understanding that nobody wants to go to the club and have a well gin and tonic. So the simplest way to make somebody feel special and like to understand the person is to ask them what kind of gin they prefer. And it works just as well for rum or vodka or anything. And vodka is probably even better because all vodka is basically the same.
The same, yeah. Yeah, well said. My neighbours might disagree, but they're wrong.
Well, I have some family members that are invested in a vodka company, and they would tell me I was wrong too, and I'd be like, "Going, I'm pretty sure I've been around enough booze in my time that I know that I know that I'm right, but it's not worth an argument."
And I guess then, without making too many assumptions, because I want to talk more about pricing and especially value-based pricing, but I suppose that kind of immediacy of the significance of price when you are in nightclubs facing customers asking what gin you prefer, then it's right, it's at your fingertips, isn't it? So like you're so attached to that type of conversation and decision that when you did hit 37 years old or whatever it was probably a much easier and more natural question for you to kind of explore than a lot of marketers who see that that particular P as quite terrifying sometimes.
I think that I was lucky in the fact that like from the very start, right? So in that nightclub experience, I was attached to customer and price right away. And so I never had the fear of the fourth of the P, the pricing P. And actually that P helped me not at all in the job I had at 37 because I worked on the re-election campaign for President Barack Obama, and so I ended up writing a lot of ads for his re-election effort for the ad agency, one of the ad agencies that was handling all of his media and all of his advertising needs. So I absolutely like price had nothing to do with it, but the call to action and understanding how to express value definitely did.
So what led you to marketing then? So how did that even happen? How do you go from nightclubs to marketing?
Okay, let's now this is interesting. I hope for people. So I would nightclubs is all just marketing. It's all mystique. It's all story. It's all value. It's all giving people an experience, right? So there is no difference between being a marketer for a product, a car, a service than there is for being one in a nightclub. The first job where I had an inkling, though, that I was moving towards being a marketer was I helped open the Experience Music Project in Seattle. And that is a museum that was started by Paul Allen, the co founder of Microsoft. And about again, I started out work like in the bar restaurant like experience aspect of it because I'd moved to Seattle. I didn't know anybody and I didn't have any connections, and so this was a job that I could obtain. Uh, and I met his sister, who was the CEO at the time, Jody Allen. And Jody one time pulled me aside and she said, "You know, you do a really great job of selling yourself, and I think you can sell the museum and you can sell this experience. You know, and I would like to see you take on more of that role." And so that was the first time that I really started to move into something that I would define as really being marketing based. And the job, you know, and the role was really to help people come to and experience the museum. It is a really cool museum. It's changed its name now to Mopop, but it was built on the spirit of creativity as expressed through rock and roll music. And so, you know, part of the remit, to use the British term, would be to get people to donate money, to make sure artists wanted to be a part of the experience and using, you know, being a part of the museum, and it made sure people, not just tourists but locals, would come and experience the museum. They'd come before basketball games or they come before events at the arena. And that was so it was kind of a natural slide from the nightclubs to a different kind of service. And then from there it was I kept sliding like along the service route. So services, especially around entertainment, were my road into marketing. But it was never like a instant where I was like going, I am now officially a marketer. That never happened. I don't even know if I would call myself, say exactly that I am a marketer now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so you've obviously got experience with lots of different types of live experience, from that entertainment to theatre to sports. Obviously, you know, nightclubs, you would, I suppose, falls within entertainment. Did you find new challenges in each instance? How did that differ going from nightclubs to, I suppose, now more recently working in sports arenas and so on?
Oh yeah, there's definitely new challenge. There's different challenges for everything. And you know, just to go back to the last thing I said, which is about like I wouldn't know if I would call myself a marketer now. I absolutely know that I am a marketer, and so I don't want to like turn anybody off. Like, oh, I'm running from marketing. I'm not. I love the job of being a marketer because it's like, you know, probably the most important job that a business has, and it's undermined at, you know, every turn. It's so super important. But back to your question of about different challenges, there's absolutely new challenges all the time because, you know, it's like any job or industry, like people don't stand still, right? What people value is often evolving. I mean, there are some things that are absolutely is, you know, normal, and that you know, they're always true, right? People want to be connected to others, right? Like we are a social creature and we want to get together in groups. People want to feel loved, you know, and they want to like share time with people that they love and care about, right? People love experiences. Experiences are have been around as far, you know, as far back as we can remember, right? There's no difference from going to a Tottenham Hotspur match now as there was going to like the, you know, seeing the Roman chariots or like the first marathon at the modern Olympics. Those are still just experiences. So those things are similar. Where the difference comes is that, you know, there's new technologies. You know, people, each generation has its own story and its own way of, you know, experiencing joy or togetherness or happiness. And those things are really where the cool parts of being a marketer come in, because there are things that are absolutely the same, but then there are also things that you absolutely have to pay attention to because nothing is one size fits all. It's like in Mark Ritzen's brand management mini MBA, he tells you that each brand is unique. And to me, each experience, like each client, each opportunity is unique because you're never going to experience the same project or the same game or event with the same people ever again. You know, so like the part of the challenge is like, does this work here? Right. And if it doesn't work here, you know, why not? Like, what's different? And is that like something that's consistent with the world around me? Or is this like a fluke? You know, this is this a one off situation? You know, And that sort of just always sense of awe and inspiration about meeting new people or being in a new environment is really, one of the cool things about what I've done over the years.
Well, before we zoom in on anything in particular, I really like the way you positioned yourself a few minutes ago, and then obviously, quite rightly clarified that you're not running away from marketing. I think your route into marketing is interesting because it seems to me that in a time when I think marketing is, I suppose, generally suffering a confidence crisis of sorts. You've got marketers out there who are trying to prove that they do have a significant business value, whereas you came from the business value side of things. And then I suppose retrospectively realized you were using tools that you would traditionally suggest were for marketers to use. So actually your success of running businesses, whether it was nightclubs or wherever else it was, you already had that demonstrated value. Whereas I think nowadays there's often marketers out there who are trying to kind of win that, metaphorical seat back in the boardroom, or however you want to best articulate it. And it's because they don't see the business impact that they have, or maybe they don't get the respect that function really deserves.
So for me, right, I have been lucky in that the value idea was there from the very start, and I understood it. I just didn't always understand the language of marketing because, I think this is only accelerated now. It's that, marketing gets put down, right? Marketing is like those guys who they throw the funny parties, or they're like going, what exactly does marketing do? And my learning of marketing was, really attached to the bottom line. It was attached to, sales, to the point where I have a degree in marketing, and then I have many trainings, and I think we'll probably touch on these things, the importance of that later. But I didn't necessarily know that those were the jobs of marketers. I just knew that was where, if I could figure out how to make money and how to create profit, then I would always have security. And I grew up in a really, I went to high school in Fort Lauderdale, but until I was 14 years old, I grew up in northern Georgia. And so I know that there are people that listen to this from probably all over the world. Where I grew up in northern Georgia was a county that probably had 5,000 people. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was the first person, actually. This will blow people's mind, maybe, or maybe yours at least, like, because this is just a conversation with us. Is I was the first person in my family that always had indoor plumbing, and so I didn't have this like romantic thing with like marketing or strategy or any of these things. I knew I needed to figure out a good job and something that would allow me to have a quote unquote, I guess, inverted commas for the British audience, good job. And so I knew that if you could make money and that you could create value, then you would have some level of security. And that was what really drove me and into the direction of marketing and sales and all of these things. It was necessity. But I think I missed the question. I don't know if I answered it at all.
Time, weather, and... We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles Edwards, on 01189 952 007. Only last week, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and lead generation. But we're not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
Marketing is incredibly confused with sales.
I think you're the one who's more confused, Gary V. Sunshine.
No, I think you did.
Here we go.
Just added more meat to the bones of the question, because the question was effectively more so about, I suppose, the route or the way you would frame what you were doing prior to realizing that it's had huge similarities with what someone who starts in marketing would think of them attempting to do for a business. So whilst at the moment seems to be this real kind of challenge for marketers to demonstrate that they have a significant role in a business's success, you almost were like already in the making businesses successful arena, and then retrospectively through various things, no doubt experience, but also the training, and you've nodded to Mark Ritson, brand MBA, realised that actually a lot of what you were doing instinctively and from being, in the coalface of customers, customer facing, was actually a lot of marketing.
Oh yeah, and I would say that like probably as I got older and I started to realize this too, I started to feel, and this is partly where I'll pay Mark another hat tip here. The mini MBA, the mini MBA in brand management, both of those things, talk about the confidence. It was there was probably a few years where I was like going, what value do I really add to marketing or like to the marketing conversation? And I was like going, actually, there's a whole world of stuff. And it's like having the conversation and the ability to understand how these experiences apply to marketing and like help people understand these concepts has been really powerful to me, because I probably always felt like going a little, I don't want to use imposter syndrome because I think that's a dodge, but like a little bit of imposter syndrome around being a marketer, just because of most of these jobs never would have been like really termed as marketing.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think that confidence that you would have picked up from that and various other sources, much like I have myself, then enables you to talk with more authority about things, whether it is pricing, whether it is strategy.
I am a complete blowhard now. Let's not kid ourselves. Like before, I might have hedged, but now I am completely like going, I know this. If you don't like it, it's fine. You're wrong. So that confidence cuts both ways.
I think two of the really meaty topics I want to get into actually both come up in our listener questions, and we've had a load sent in, so I think we'll move there. But before we do, just so I don't forget, can you share your Eddie Vedder story briefly?
Okay, so and I will share this in a very anodyne way. It's not anodyne at all, but
Nah, you don't need to go anodyne.
No. So anyway, there's this organization. Giles and I were having coffee at Costa Coffee, recently, and we were talking about how I built my business and how he's been building Gasp with his team. And I was saying, like, a lot of what I do is every year I will pick one or two organizations that I can do pro bono work for. And a couple years back, 2019, I picked the EB Research Foundation. So that's ebresearch.org. It's Epididymis isis paloma. It is a rare skin disease, and it is brutal. It is so if we have 7 layers of skin that cover our bodies, these kids have 1 or 2, and it makes the kids feel like they're constantly on fire. And so I met the executive director, a guy called Michael Hund, and he's an incredible nonprofit executive. He's an incredible leader. And I said, look, I want to help any way I can. So we worked on we worked up some stuff around strategy and marketing. So come to find out, and I knew this going in, but like still, I didn't know how important and how powerful this would be. That one of 3 founding families was Eddie Vedder and his wife Jill, and they were moved because they know a child that has Epididymis isis paloma. They wanted to contribute to the efforts. Ed and Jill are very involved, and it's just a great organization. So I would encourage anybody to look it up. But Ed was going to be on TV, and he was going to be part of I forget the exact name of it. I think it was like something like we something, and it had nothing to do with WeWork, but it was like something with we. But he wrote a song for a young man called Eli, and you can find it by Googling "Come Say Hi with Eli" on the internet. And so our job was to figure out how to use Ed's appearance on TV to drive awareness and brand equity for EB Research Foundation. And so, and one of the things we wanted to do was like use this as a kickoff to, make some long-term strategic actions. Right. And so one of the things was like, well, how are we going to drive web traffic to the website? And I sat in a meeting, and this goes with Giles has a question about, or had an experience where somebody pretended like it was all their wisdom and strategy that drove web traffic to a certain soccer team, which I will let Giles say if he wants to, without ever saying like, this absolutely is because of X player signing with X club. And at the time we were sitting there at the coffee shop, and I go, so the different approach that I had was like, I told everybody to like going, look, we go tell the board, and we'll tell everybody like, look, we're going to like get all this web traffic and all of this excitement and all this buzz around the brand. But we won't say why. And I go, and why is because it's Eddie Vedder. and I was like going, it's just so obvious. Like I was like, if Eddie Vedder's on TV, people are definitely going to Google it. They're definitely going to go to the website. They're definitely going to be involved. And I was like going, and most people just run away from it. And you tell your story, or if not, but it was like pretty good because it was the exact opposite story where I ran right towards it.
Yeah, some people just don't show their hand, do they? They don't show their hand. And I sat in this really painful talk once by one of those social type agencies that often over kind of elaborate or put a bit more shine on what they do. But anyway, this guy was claiming credit for the how viral a tweet had gone that he had written, but the tweet was from Zlatan Ibrahimovic, one of the most famous footballers on the planet, signing for Man United, one of the most famous clubs in world football. He was claiming credit for the 20 million retweets because of the way he had written the tweet, and it was just absolutely scandalous. And I remember looking around me thinking, surely everyone else can see that this guy is just claiming something that's utter bullshit, and everyone else was just applauding like seals, and I was just found it so depressing. And then on the flip side, I told you that, and your Eddie Vedder story just completely restored balance for me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was going to say I only made it anodyne because I did not use the colorful language that I used. But yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes some of the success of some of these campaigns and some of these things you do, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. Like if you had to ask me what is a key theme of my career, I'd say being in the right place at the right time has been one of the big winners for me.
Yeah. And we should all embrace that. We shouldn't try and kind of understate that either. Right. So listener question time, because I've got 4 to work through. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. We usually choose 2, but we've got 4. Matt, I think that's Matt Zaracina. I've just murdered his surname. Sorry, Matt, I'm an idiot. Matt has asked, how should emerging tech trends be, or tech/tech trends be accounted for or incorporated into a client's broader strategic plans?
First off, like Matt is a big Spurs fan. So we should definitely, I know Matt, so he's definitely a big Spurs fan.
I like Matt already.
Yeah, good guy. He sent me actually a DM from a Spurs match, and he's like going, "Oh, I wish you were here." He's American, so I see him fairly regularly, so I know exactly who this is. But tech and tech trends and how they should play into things, and this is not something that we got a chance to cover too much, but I guess we'll cover it now, which is the importance of setting a strategy before you decide what tools you are going to use to implement the strategy. Too often, when you're dealing with people who have a new tech or want to use new tech, or are too close to the trends, they don't have a strategy in place. They're just like going, "Oh man, I have to use TikTok because everybody is using TikTok. I have to be on Facebook because Giles told me I needed to be on Facebook, and I must have a Facebook strategy," which is not a strategy at all. It is tactics. So the answer from my point of view about using tech and tech trends is like, it really depends. And it depends because you have to make wise decisions about what your strategy is. What I found, I did some research over the last, I constantly am doing research. I am take my own medicine on this, but I found that most organizations, or I guess about 45% of organizations don't actually have a clear laid out strategy that they can point to. And I thought that was a ridiculous number until I dug in, and I think it actually might be low. So before you make any decision about how you're going to use new tech or follow tech trends, you have to understand a couple choices around strategy. And the first one is like, where are you trying to go? Like, what's the ambition of the business? What's success going to look like? And the second one is like, where you're going to compete. Like, what's the segment of the market you're going after? And then you need to understand why somebody's going to pick you over anybody else. Then you can start to make those decisions about, should I be following trends or should I be using new tech? Because before you've answered those 3 questions or understood those 3 aspects of your business, you can't realistically say, "Oh, I want this piece of tech," or "I'm going to follow this trend," because you have not made a decision about what your business is, who you are, how you're going to move forward. And that would be my answer to that question. It's like you have to. It just highlights the importance of strategy, and in too many places, strategy is just discarded.
Yeah, perfect. Couldn't agree more. As I think you know, but I think so many people, it's actually quite easy to do things back to front sometimes, especially with the kind of media rhetoric of new tech appearing on the scene. And when things do launch, it's almost like you can't move, especially in industry press, about how shiny this new thing called TikTok might be, or whatever channel it might be. And equally, it's not to say that tool isn't going to be of huge benefit to you, but it's just a bit cart before the horse to think that way around.
Yeah, it could be the greatest tool that you use, but you have to make that determination on your own, and it's very difficult for people to push back on whatever the conventional wisdom is. But the conventional wisdom is why, if you look at use Peter Drucker metric, and I'm not gonna try to tell you exactly the name for it because I would butcher this, but it was just like the return on your capital, right? The return on capital for most Western businesses is unimpressively low, and that's because everybody's in this race to like, let me win an advertising award at Cannes. Let me get in Ad Age, or let me be featured in some kind of business press. Whereas like the goal of a business is to create and keep a customer and to generate enough profit so that the business is sustainable and adds value to society. It's not to just win awards and be like this shiny new thing, or to make your friends like going, oh, look at what I did with TikTok. I mean, that's not. I mean, it could be a goal, but it shouldn't be the goal of your business. It should be something else you're doing.
Yeah, exactly that. I've had a question from that great man Nick Ellis as well.
Yeah, let's do that. One of my favorite episodes.
Oh right, yeah, and my wife's. She's got a bit of a soft spot for Nick, which is I'm working on. I told her that he kicks cats and orphans. And this isn't a million miles away from what we just touched on, I suppose. But Nick says, why do brands think they have a place in the metaverse? Haven't they read Snow Crash? Don't they know they ruin everything by plastering ads everywhere?
So why do brands think they have a place in the metaverse? I have still not necessarily bought into the idea that the metaverse is going to be anything super substantial. When it comes to like NFTs, the metaverse, blockchain, all of this newfangled digital, these digital assets, I have found that there is I'm going to be generous today because, as I was telling you, I had a little illness, so I'm feeling a little bit more generous, a little bit less going to be dismissive of everybody right now. I'm going to say that there's less than 5 people I trust on this topic. The metaverse just seems like a made up way for Facebook to keep its relevance, right? And there's nothing in Facebook's history or background that would lead me to believe that the metaverse is going to be anything more than Libra, which, if you don't remember what Libra was the thing that was going to revolutionize money that Mark Zuckerberg had created. The metaverse, though, and why haven't people decided that they can, it's not a good idea to plaster ads everywhere? It's really because people are measuring the wrong things. And it goes back to earlier in the conversation, I think, when we were talking about understanding value, understanding pricing, understanding profitability. People don't necessarily understand that. So then it's easy to use metrics like, well, the number of impressions matters, even though the number of impressions is probably worthless, right? Like, because what is the famous, again, I'm leaning heavily on Mark Ritson. We should just have like a triple podcast with Mark. He did a talk that I saw one time where he talked about, like, here's what an impression looks like, and it's like maybe a quarter or an eighth of the screen that is clicked through for like a tenth of a second or something crazy like that. An impression is probably mostly garbage, right? I mean, if you've been on Twitter, you can go through and get 50 impressions or views of a video just because you had your cell phone open while you were on a call. So like, it's because it's an easy metric to measure. It doesn't mean it's a good measure. It just means it's easy. And as long as you're rewarded for something, of course you're going to stick with that, right? I mean, it's just human nature, or at least the nature of modern capitalism, unfettered capitalism, which is like, if you're rewarded for it, it must be right.
Yeah, very good. I also recall my one of my older brothers, Andrew, his time at Leo Burnett years and years ago. when they opened an agency in Half-Life. And I still to this day remember being in his house and him telling me that. And I was just, part of me had that marketing magpie thing of, oh, that sounds interesting and really smart and sexy. And then the other half, I was just thinking, but why?
Yes, yeah. There is a endless list, and I'm sure it's probably, if I open my emails now, because I really have set up my email so that they just get sent into a folder. Well, people who are going to explain to me why NFTs are going to change sports and live entertainment. There's like no end to those people who want to tell me this, and I'm like going, but is it really? I was like going, I got the NFT for the Batman movie, and it's just like a JPEG of a Batman movie poster that it's like, and it's one of like 10,000. I was like going, is that really valuable? Is that really going to change anything? Or is that just going to be annoying? Nobody has been able to really explain it to me in a way that I don't end up going, that just sounds like BS. I think you're bullshitting me.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think sadly, the line between whether it's bullshit or valuable is often very, very fine. Especially when you start introducing art into things. So you never know.
I definitely only trust the people who go, well, and there's I will credit her, and then I will definitely say that this impression is all mine. But one of the only people, maybe the only person that I listen to is a former guest on your podcast, and that's Zoe Skaman. And because she's incredibly smart and thoughtful about this stuff. And I think that, I don't know if she said this, so I'm going to this is all me. But it's like when she goes, it may not work. It may not be anything at all. And, and that's the only opinion I would really trust, is like somebody who's willing to say like going, it might not, but it might be a great thing. And the thing is like, why wouldn't you take a shot on it if you see value in it? Because there are limited opportunities to make a real dent sometimes in a new spot. And, and I would, if she didn't say that, then I'll accept credit for it. Because if the hate mail should come to me, if she did say it, I think she's a genius for saying it.
Yeah, no, funny enough, her name came up earlier, a few hours ago here at Gasp. We were talking about something that's, I suppose, unrelated, but the conclusion we made, and I nodded to Zoe and her discussions she often has, or recommendations around sci-fi, because it kind of explores that it depends question, or what if this, then what would happen type thought processes, was that we needed more people in marketing who weren't afraid to just say, we think this might work, but we're not sure, but it's worth a go. And having that attitude and that mindset, because I think that lots of people have probably written it well. I know Bob Hoffman certainly has talked about how marketing is just kind of a way of strategically placing bets that we think, based on our experience and knowledge and smarts and everything else, will reap a return, but you can never be sure. And I think there's a real kind of power to having that approach that few have the confidence to take.
That's absolutely true. And the way you put it too, it reminds me of, there is a definite distinction that I try to make around my work, where it's like, there's a lot of marketing, but there's a great deal of strategy. And the marketing strategy is different than the corporate level strategy. And the marketing strategy, I rely a lot more on data and research and things that have happened in the past to look for trends and habits and patterns. But on a corporate level, a big level, somebody I would point the audience towards is Roger Martin. And Roger was the dean of the Rotman School of Management in Toronto. But he talks about, and you can Google it, he did a really great talk, I think in like Switzerland or Sweden, one of those great countries with mountains and chocolate. And he talked about how all data happened in the past, and to be a really great strategist. Yeah. This is where the analyst and architect thing came from that you mentioned in the introduction, was that like, you have to be willing to take a chance, right? A good strategist knows that like, I'm really taking a risk here because it might not work. And you have to be comfortable with that, because a strategy at its heart is about not guaranteeing success, but giving yourself the opportunity to have, success be more likely than not, to give yourself an advantage in, how do I want to say it? To give yourself just, a little bit more of an edge in strategy, because no one can guarantee it's going to work, right? It's not about perfection. It's about progress. And it's about, eliminating, stupid missteps so that like you can do some real creative work that isn't guaranteed to work.
Exactly that. Well, talking of missteps, Scott Friedman asks,
Oh yeah.
what's the most common mistake rights holders make while pricing tickets?
Okay, so Scott's asking for a specific answer around tickets, and since you'll probably get a lot of people who listen or sports and entertainment listening because of this episode, maybe hopefully, but most people aren't. So I'm going to answer it. I'm going to change it. I'm going to take poetic license and answer it a little bit more from a straight up like pricing point, because the reasons that people do a bad job with pricing are absolutely the same, right? Number one, people don't have a philosophy of pricing, right? They don't even understand the most basic forms of pricing, right? Which is, most of the time it's just pulling it out of thin air. So nobody does research, right? And you can do research on pricing just the same as you can do research on customers, on, industry, on, market potential. You can ask questions, right? You can use conjoint studies. You can use the Van Westendorf pricing model. You can experiment. You can do all these crazy things. So the number one reason why people make mistakes, and the biggest area they make mistakes, is they just don't have any idea what they're doing around pricing. So they haven't done any research. They don't have any philosophy or theory behind their pricing, and they make it up. They pull it out of thin air. I think it's the last podcast as we're recording this in my feed on the Business of Fun, but you can search for it. It was 7 different things I knew and learned about pricing. And one of the big things that I tell people to understand is like, just figure out, are you going to be a low cost leader or a premium product from the very jump? Right. Have an understanding of where you're starting at in the market, right? Because most people, a big issue is they get stuck in the middle. They don't know, have no idea. Are they trying to, just get business in the door, right? So then you might be a low cost leader, or it's like, are you going to turn your nose up at 9 out of 10 people, right? Because I don't need to work with everybody. I need to work with this little segment of the market. And I'll tell you the truth. When I started out doing this stuff, I definitely struggled with that. I was stuck in the middle for years. And because I was like afraid to say no to people because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get another project. I'm never going to have a chance to do this anymore. But the truth is like charging people more has actually opened up way more opportunities than I could have ever imagined. And those are big reasons that people fail at pricing. I mean, there's tons of reasons, but I mean, not really having a philosophy, not doing any research, and just not understanding what they're trying to achieve with their pricing. Those are like 3 kind of keys that touch everybody.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Well, we can stick with pricing and take a slightly deeper dive now because Julio has asked a question on Twitter, and he says Mark Ritson famously says that any and all discounting is bad for brands. Do you have any thoughts when it can play a useful role?
Okay, so this is a good question, and I actually, when I saw it on Twitter, I answered it because I didn't want him to think I was being needlessly snarky. I was just being snarky. So the first question is about brand. Do I think discounts destroy brands? And the truth is, absolutely. It's the worst way. It's the fastest way to undermine your brand is a price-based promotion. Full stop. I wrote an article about 7 years ago now that's called "Discounts Are for Dummies." And that thing it has been like the biggest, as far as driver of business goes, it has been the biggest driver of business, anything I've done. It was, and really the core of the thing was like, don't discount because here's all the bad reasons or the bad things that happen to your brand if you discount. So number 1, you lose brand equity. Number 2, it's like you lose profitability. Number 3, you teach a bad lesson to your customers. And that's typically that, like, if I hold on a little bit longer, there'll probably be a better deal, right? You don't create brand loyalty for people, right? Because there's, they're just waiting for your price to drop because that's what you taught them to think about you, right? You lose your place in the market, right? You have no standing. You undermine your value as an expert or as a quality. I mean, it's on and on and on. Is the undermining the brand value there. What Mark said specifically, he said that, but I think what what was really going on was Mark also said like never discount, and actually what he said is that you should feel a little bit like some of your soul is dying every time you discount. And I like that because there are instances where you probably do have to discount. It's not 100% as much. I try to take an absolutist position on it just because I found that it's so easy for people to discount and continue to discount once they've started. So, and that leads to the second question, which is like when, or the second part of the question, like, is there any time that you should discount? Well, and there are a couple instances that I'll give you 3 right now, which number one is like, if you are at the end of a cycle, right? And you're just trying to liquidate stuff fast that you're never going to use again or never going to have a need for, it's probably all right to discount that stuff. If it's coming back in a couple months, then that's stupid. That's like kind of the J. Crew model of discounting. But if something's going to go away forever and you have like, you're sitting on like just tons and tons of inventory, you may want to discount, just get the stuff out the door, right? Just get like recoup some value. A second way is, a price war. There are instances, and I've done research on price wars. A price war can work. The problem is, though, is that you have to do a price war the right way. And a price war done the right way is like, number one, you have to understand what you're trying to achieve, right? Are you trying to steal market share from the leader? Are you are sitting on such amount of profit that you just want to run people out of business? What exactly do you want to achieve from the price war? Number two, you have to have a plan for what your price war is going to look like, because most of the time when people start discounting, they don't know when they're going to start and when they're going to end. So they have no plan for what this discount or the price war that they're entering in is going to look like. And then the third thing is like, don't go deep enough, right? Like you see a 10% off coupon, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to discount. That doesn't move the thing. It's like going, when I say go all in, it's like going, be willing to cut your price 30, 40, 50%, because it's limited in scope. You understand exactly what you're trying to achieve, and you have the balls to go for it, right? Because you don't want to just hang around and always be a discount brand. The Martin Lindstrom book that's called Biology, it studies like neuromarketing. It showed, and his research may be wrong, but it feels right. So I'm going to use it. Was like, once you start discounting, it's 7 years or more before people stop thinking of you as a discount brand.
That's amazing. 7 years. I'm trying to remember the term that is used in Australia. As I said, most of my family live in Australia, but one of them, up until recently, was in the sort of pub trade. It's not really the same over there as it is in the UK. But obviously Australia produces a lot of great wines, and to protect the brand and that equity that exists within a brand of wine, when they have to sell off their remaining stock, it happens entirely unbranded. There might be a term for that I'm not familiar with, but you can basically buy, it's like a lucky dip, I suppose, because you don't actually know the brand of wine, but you buy it at half price knowing it's worth more, and that's how they ship it. And of course then you're discounting, but Julio specifically talks about it being bad for brands. Well, this again highlights that, yeah, it must be, because they hide the brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in the States, one way that happens, that and I don't want to misrepresent the example, but white label items here, or Costco does a lot of stuff that's like unbranded, only has the Costco branding, which is Kirkland Signature, and nobody's buying the Kirkland Signature or they're buying it because of the Kirkland Signature brand, not because of the brand of the producer of their liquor or wine. So I mean, those are ways to do it, but I'm sure that the Australians have a very good and colorful language, so I'm sure they have a specific term for it that I'm going to look up, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'll try and find out actually, because I'm surprised I don't know that actually. Cool. Well, they were awesome. They were awesome list of questions, and I'm pleased because it allowed us to jump into strategy and pricing more.
Well, we got to like some of the stuff that we wanted to. That's exactly right.
It's like they knew. The final part of the interview then, Dave, is our 4 pertinent posers, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay, so I was thinking about this one because these are the only things you give me to prepare, right? And well, I thought the cute way to do it is like I would not change anything. And I thought that that's like a little bit like, I think people have been using that a little lately or here and there. And I think it's a BS answer. You're dodging the question. I'm not going to dodge the question. I'm going to give you some answers.
Yeah, it's your time you're wasting, Dave.
Oh yeah, well, this is like an old speaker's trick where it's like when you filibuster by like filling space while you think of the answer. But actually, like if I had some advice for my younger self, it would be three things, right? Number one is I would learn to be YOLO a little bit earlier. And by YOLO, you only live once. It's like being willing to take chances and to trust myself earlier, right? We talked about towards the start of this thing of like me not necessarily recognizing that all of this stuff I was doing had a marketing angle to it, or that it was like really valuable and it was stuff that other people weren't doing or weren't doing well. So I would like have learned to trust I would teach myself or tell myself, be YOLO a little bit more early on in your career. Number two, I would tell myself to remember the value of relationships a lot more. Probably in my 20s and 30s, or into my 30s, I didn't necessarily always put as much emphasis and as much power into the relationships. And, looking back on it with a little distance now, I can see that partly I'm responsible, but then partly, it's sort of like you put yourself in bad positions, which I think is sort of like what everybody in their 20s and early 30s does, is they put yourself in like some dumb positions and then you figure out how to get yourself out. And then you hope that it has no irreparable harm for the rest of your life. But I would focus on those relationships because it's if I was doing was isolated talk, I would talk about the power of the people that I've had the opportunity to work for and work with over the years, and how important those people are, and how I wish that I had been able to sustain relationships or kept better relationships with certain people over the years. So that would be number two. And then number three is I would teach myself to not give a damn about other people's opinions. I would just completely discard anybody's opinion that I didn't ask for. And those would be the three things I would teach my younger self.
Yeah, really good answer, Dave. Number two, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Oh yeah, now okay, hero worship. Let's get this hero worship idea out on the table.
And what's his name?
Well, no, it's just in general. I think we have false idols, right? Does that come from a Batman movie, I think, or something? But there's false. Maybe that was the Justice League, but in Superman they were talking about. But there's false idols, right? I would banish this idea that somebody has some secret sauce and some secret magic that you don't. Right. I think that what we find as we dig deeper is that most of these people who are quote unquote self-made or, that we're idolizing, they have benefited from, having the right family or having the right, having somebody advocate for them, or no one's self-made. Right. So there's, everybody, which makes the question at the start, right, which is like, what's the first job and what's the first proper job and what's your path, so important, is because if you have really made your way, most times it's because of like a lot of luck, like we talked about before, meeting the right people in the right place at the right time, good fortune, and sometimes it's just the luck of birth. So like some of this hero worship stuff, I would get rid of because it undermines all that stuff. And I think it teaches people that they can't possibly be successful. And I try as much as I can to help people understand how they can be successful or show them paths to be successful. The more and more work I do is like around revenue, is like, I want to teach people the process of making money because I know it gives them security and it gives them an opportunity to be successful in a way that they might not have before. So I would get rid of the hero worship thing and be a lot more selective about the people that we're really paying attention to and highlighting and putting up on a pedestal. Most of the people, they aren't worthy of the platforms that they sit upon.
Well said.
Minus you. You are absolutely should be hero worshipped.
Yeah, no one worships me for a reason, Dave.
Not even my family. They all gave up on me a long time ago.
Now I'm looking forward to the next one because you've already mentioned you were going to go for a more unique angle to some previous books that have come up. So are there any books that you would recommend to our listeners?
Sure. These are going to be, I have a couple, and I'm going to start with like two that your audience I know have never, ever thought of before. And the first one's Start With Why, and the second one's Crush It. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Those things are completely, I would not, I mean, if they're the only books you read, then I would say go ahead and read them. But I would advise you to read something better. So I have 4 books, though, that I would like to suggest. The first one is fairly new, and I don't know when the podcast is going to go out, but this book is coming out around, I think the release date's March or May 2nd. So we're recording at the end of April. And it is a book by Roger Martin that I mentioned earlier, who's like probably the greatest strategy professor alive now, right? He might be the greatest ever. He has a new book called A New Way of Thinking, and I was fortunate enough to get an advanced copy of it, and it is amazing. It is like one of the most useful strategy books I've ever read, and he talks about, understanding where to compete and how to win. He talks about, his idea of integrative thinking, which is kind of similar to the way we would think about improv. So instead of but, you say and it's combining ideas. He talks about, where people make mistakes, the choice cascade. That's the hardest strategy. It's a really great book. It is pretty easy to read for a strategy book. And he is a phenomenal teacher of the art of strategy. So A New Way of Thinking would be the number 1 book. Number 2 is a classic. And this is a book that if people haven't read, I don't know what they're waiting on, because it's been around and it is credited as the first book about corporate strategy, but it's called Managing for Results by Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker has this amazing way of still being right, even though he's been dead for almost 20 years. When I was learning corporate strategy, Managing for Results was kind of like my Bible. And it still holds up. Some of the references might be a little dated, but it still holds up very well. It's an incredible book, and I would tell people to check that one out. The third book is in honor of, and we talked about her before, Zoe Scaman, who talks about the need to read fiction more. And so this is my favorite, or I have 2, I'll say like 3 favorite novels of all time. This is the number 1 one, though. It's called Underworld, and it's by a guy called Don DeLillo, who is a American author who has never won the Nobel Prize for Literature, but he's always in the conversation. He's getting up there now, so they should give it to him. But Underworld is this 800-page novel that takes you from the start of the testing. So in American baseball, there's a shot heard around the world, and it happened the same day as the Russians tested their first nuclear weapon. So that's the start of the book, and it takes you all the way through history to the start of the internet. And it follows the American century, and it is like full of rich characters, rich detail. It really kind of shows you like what it would be to have been an American and an American adult at that, the peak of the American century. It is an unbelievable book. It's about 850 pages. It will hold your door open if you need a doorstop. But it takes a lot of work to get through it, but it's completely worth it. And if anybody asks, the other 2 are The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles and The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. So those are the 3 favorite novels. And then the final one is, people ask me all the time, like, tell me about a pricing resource. So Herman Simon is probably the most famous pricing expert in the world. And I did not necessarily really know his work very well until Mark Ritson told me about it. And so he has a book out called The Confessions of a Pricing Man. And it is like, maybe it is 200 pages, but it is the most intense and informative book on pricing that I have ever seen. It can be kind of difficult to find, but it is worth it. If you might have to pay a premium for it, it is worth it. And it's called Confessions of a Pricing Man, and it gives like his history in pricing, and it is just an unbelievable guide to pricing. It's just great. So did I repeat any books from any previous guests? Because that was my goal not to.
Well, do you know what? I think one of them has come up before. I'm pretty sure Underworld has come up before, but that's no bad thing.
Damn them.
Yeah, but there's at least 5 there that probably haven't. And I'm surprised, actually. Maybe Peter Drucker, I don't know. I would have expected him to have come up, but I actually can't think of any guest who recommended that. So apologies if you have recommended that previously, but I did get corrected by a past guest. Apparently, I once did remark that something was the first time it had come up, and then a previous guest. He was on WhatsApp immediately.
Don't worry, I won't do that. That will not happen.
Awesome. No, there's plenty there. I've not read Confessions of a Pricey Man, but I'm certainly going to look that up. But we will include links to all of those books you've just run through on the episode listing. And then number 4, Dave, is we always dedicate every episode to someone. And we bestow that honour to our guest, who has to give the reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Am I allowed to take poetic license with this thing?
Well, you know, that's your approach throughout. So yeah. Yeah, of course you can.
I figured after you came on my podcast that you knew that there was who was going to have control of this thing. I'm going to dedicate it to 3 people, right? You know, and I was telling you about my my health issues. So the first person I would dedicate it to is my partner, Catherine, because I had like a real serious battle with the long COVID, and I spent like eight days in the hospital, staring into the maw of the American healthcare system. I wouldn't have made it without her. So I mean, like, to not dedicate it to her would be like I'd be a jerk, you know. And she's just like she's just an incredible person, and you know. Like, going through the world with her is unbelievable. So I want to first, thank her and dedicate this thing to her. 2 people that I want to, or number 2 is I found out these 2 guys were really good friends of mine when I lived in Seattle, and only when I had my near-death experience, and then I found out one of the guys is actually dealing with stage 4 cancer. It made me reflect on how important these guys were to me getting to be here today on, like, your podcast, which is, again, probably the greatest marketing podcast going, in my opinion. Is my friend Gil Bond and Mark 5, and Gil has, unfortunately, I can't travel, and they're having a party for him. I don't think, when I talked about relationships, things I teach myself, my younger self, I could never quite express how important these 2 guys were to me. And so, like, through all this stuff, I realized just how important those guys were to me, and how without their friendship and, like, some of the, like, support and, like, just, big upping me or whatever that I had, they gave me in my 20s, I would have never achieved much of anything, I don't think. So I want to, Gil Bond and Mark 5 would be number 2. And then number 3, I want to dedicate this to Mauricio Pochettino, because I got to bring it back to something good, because even though I love Antonio Conte, Pochettino is my man.
I love him too, as well. What a man. What a man.
And I knew that, like, I figured I would be able to be like, nobody's ever dedicated an episode to Pochettino.
No, well, I'm going to have to try and let him know as well, I think.
That would be amazing. That would be awesome.
This is awesome. Right, okay, so this episode is very proudly dedicated to Catherine, and then it was Gil Bond and Mark.
Yep, Gil Bond and Mark 5.
Gil Bond and Mark 5, and Mauricio Pochettino. Wonderful.
We lost complete control of this episode now.
Yeah. I'll let you close. No, so as a final call to action, then, if you head over to this episode, we'll list everything. So we'll list a new way of thinking. Hopefully, that's out by the time this episode is released, if not pre-orderable. Managing for Results, Underworld, all of the other books you reference. We'll link to you. I know you've got your website, and we have in our research dug out a couple of your articles on pricing and strategy, which we'll include. But how else can our listeners get more Dave Wakeman?
Definitely hit the website, davewakeman.com. I had a wonderful designer rebuild it during the early parts of the pandemic, so it looks like I really know what I'm talking about now. So check out my website. That's davewakeman.com.
That is a good designer.
Yeah, she's amazing. This woman is unbelievable. As far as social media, you find me on the Twitter most of the time, even though I don't know how I feel about Elon buying Twitter. I still have not bought into LinkedIn as much as other people. I do go over there a little bit, but LinkedIn, just Google or search for me. I'm Dave Wakeman. You'll see the big fat mug, even though right now I'm currently sporting more of a beard than I would normally do. You can find me on the Twitters at Dave_Wakeman. I'm still just trying to get the full just Dave Wakeman. That's what I want, but I haven't been able to get there yet. As far as events and talks, if you go to the website, there is a store and there will be a calendar function. And so there will be events. I'm looking at doing an event in Australia and also coming back to London so that we can go to a Spurs match. I'm going to do a couple of workshops, and one will be around pricing and the other will be around strategy. I haven't fully scheduled those yet, but that's just because I have to make sure when the Spurs schedule comes out for the new season. So that's completely the truth there. It will be sometime in probably September or October. I will be in London, but I will be in Sydney in November, the start of November. So around the 1st or October 31st or March or November 1st will be in Sydney, but those will be listed on my website, and they will be really small and intense opportunities to work out like your strategy and your pricing strategy, and to take a deeper dive on pricing than we ever did today.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, as I say, we'll link to the website and your socials, so make sure that those links are correct. So, Dave, listen, I think, as you know, I've enjoyed this hugely. Thank you so much for joining us on Call to Action.
It was a real treat to be on here. I only thing I regret about our conversation is I don't know if I got to be the longest episode of your podcast like you were the longest episode of mine.
What are we on? And now you're not far off, actually.
Yeah, I thought about it. I was like, how could I push for the Rory Sutherland thing of getting broken in half?
Oh,
but
yes, of course.
But thank you so much for having me. I'm not BSing when I say this podcast is a wonderful resource for people, and I hope you continue to do it far into the future, because I think it really provides a really great forum for your guests, and I learn a lot every time.
Oh, thanks, Dave. So do I. But thank you. That's really kind of you to say. And finally, last thank you to everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. It's really easy to find Gasp online to get in touch, and you can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltooaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.